Ava Montgomery had always known her place. She learned early on that the world saw her as nothing more than a shadow, a figure meant to clean the messes of those who didn't even spare a glance for her existence. The Blackwood mansion, tucked away in the hills of Beverly, was a palace of extravagance, a world of polished marble floors and gleaming crystal chandeliers. Ava had seen it all from the quiet corners of her existence, scrubbing floors, polishing silver, making the beds, always beneath the gaze of the family who lived there. The mansion, with its towering walls, held no warmth for her. It never had. Her mother, too, had worked in the homes of the wealthy, but Ava always knew there was something different about the Blackwoods. They weren't just wealthy. They were untouchable. A class of people who regarded anyone beneath them with a sense of casual cruelty. Ava had watched them for years. Richard Blackwood, the arrogant patriarch of the family. His wife, Helena, whose icy beauty matched her cold-heartedness. And their 2 children, who carried the air of entitlement with every step they took. They treated Ava as little more than the furniture they barely noticed. At 28, Ava had spent nearly a decade cleaning their home, invisible to them, a mere servant in their eyes. But unlike her mother, who had silently accepted this fate, Ava had begun to wonder if there was more to life than this. She dreamed of owning a home, a place where she could escape from the world of mansions and marble, where she could be more than just someone's shadow. But those dreams seemed impossible. She had no inheritance, no connections. Her family's wealth had long been erased from history, and Ava had learned that in this world, your worth was measured in what you owned, not who you were. She was raised in a humble apartment in a working-class neighborhood, where every day was a struggle to survive. Her father had passed away when she was young, leaving her mother to raise her on her own. Despite the hardship, Ava's mother always told her stories of a time when their family had been part of something greater, when her father, Ava's grandfather, had been a man of importance. A businessman who had rubbed shoulders with the most powerful people in the city. But that legacy was lost after betrayal by a powerful man, the very same man who now owned the Blackwood mansion. It was a betrayal that Ava had never fully understood. But her mother's words haunted her. They stole our future, Ava. They took everything we had, and we never had a chance to fight back. The Blackwoods had built their fortune on lies and deceit, their rise to the top marked by the destruction of others, including Ava's own family. They'd erased her family from history, but what if Ava could reclaim that lost history? What if there was more to her story than cleaning the floors of the mansion that had once been her family's? She didn't expect anything to change, not at first. She didn't think she had the power to take on the Blackwoods. But then, one crisp autumn morning, a gold-embossed envelope arrived for her. It was an invitation to the Blackwood charity. "Jela, come join us for an evening of elegance and celebration," the invitation read. Dress code, maximum elegance. Ava had stared at the words for a long time, disbelief running through her veins. A joke, of course. They knew she had nothing. She could already hear their laughter, see the sneers of the wealthy guests who would be gathered in the ballroom, dressed in designer gowns and suits, sipping champagne in an air of superiority. The Blackwoods had always treated her like a servant, their smiles masking the contempt they felt for her. This invitation wasn't a gesture of kindness. It was a trap. Richard Blackwood had probably made a bet with his friends, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he handed her the invitation. He would no doubt laugh when she didn't show up, humiliated and ashamed. His cruel joke would be to see her attempt to fit in with the rich and powerful, a woman who had been reduced to nothing more than a cleaning lady. But Ava wasn't the same woman she had been when she first stepped into that mansion all those years ago. Something inside her stirred. It wasn't just pride, it was a thirst for something more. She had spent too many years invisible, too many years cleaning up after people who thought they could walk all over her. This time, she wouldn't run away from their scorn. She would walk right into their midst and stand tall. She would show them exactly who she was and what they had underestimated. She wasn't just a servant. She was a woman with a legacy that was waiting to be claimed. But first, she had to prepare. The invitation wasn't just a challenge, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. Ava would not just attend the gala. She would change everything. The days leading up to the Blackwood Gala were filled with a restless energy that Ava couldn't shake. She found herself caught between two worlds, the world of her reality, where she was just a domestic worker, and the world that awaited her. At the Blackwood mansion, a world of glitz, glamour, and power. Every day, she cleaned the rooms of the mansion, dusting the shelves and polishing the silver, all the while contemplating the invitation that had arrived weeks ago. It seemed like a cruel joke at first, but now, with the date of the gala looming closer, Ava realized something. It was an opportunity. An opportunity she couldn't afford to ignore. She had heard Richard's cruel laughter when he handed her the invitation. The entire family, with their superiority and wealth, thought they had everything in their grasp. They thought that a woman like her, a black woman from a working-class background, would cower under their mockery. But Ava had spent years learning how to hold her head high, even when the world told her she was less. This gala, though it would be humiliating, would be the first step toward reclaiming her family's legacy and taking back what had been stolen from her. But as the days passed, Ava's nerves began to settle into a quiet, simmering anger. She would not be humiliated. She would not be ignored. There was something in her, the legacy of her mother, the hidden history of her family, that stirred whenever she thought about the Blackwoods' arrogance. Her grandfather had built an empire from nothing, and he had been betrayed by the very people who now lived in that mansion. Ava's bloodline had been erased, but it was still there, running through her veins. This gala would be more than a display of wealth and power. It would be the moment she reclaimed her family's rightful place. The first thing she did was search for the truth. Ava had always known bits and pieces of her family's history, but it wasn't until now that she began to understand the full scope of what had happened. Late at night, after finishing her work in the mansion, she pored over old family documents. She had kept hidden away letters, photos, and old newspaper clippings. She found traces of her grandfather's life, of the man who had once been an integral part of high society. A businessman who had once owned land, who had been respected by those in power. But his association with the Blackwood family had led to his downfall. Ava's grandfather had been a rival to Henry Blackwood, Richard's father, a man who had been charming on the outside, but cruel beneath the surface. Richard's father had been the one who had stolen her grandfather's wealth, forcing him into bankruptcy and ultimately ruining his reputation. Ava had heard whispers from her mother about how Henry Blackwood had played dirty to get ahead, how he had used his connections to manipulate the system, ensure his competitors fell, and climb the social ladder on the backs of others. What Ava didn't know was the full extent of her family's fall from grace. She had always thought of her family as the victims, but now she began to piece together the story of betrayal. Richard's father hadn't just been a businessman, he had been a murderer. When Ava uncovered the truth, a chilling realization hit her. Henry Blackwood had played a hand in her grandfather's death, using legal loopholes to cover his tracks. Ava had always suspected foul play, but now she had the proof. Armed with this knowledge, Ava set her sights on the upcoming gala. She would not go there just as a guest. She would go there to expose the Blackwoods for what they were. The dress code of the event, maximum elegance, seemed like another slap in the face. Richard and his wife Helena would laugh at her when she arrived, assuming she would show up in rags, an insignificant, invisible cleaning lady. But Ava wasn't going to let them have the satisfaction. Ava knew that the Blackwoods would underestimate her, and that gave her an edge. Richard, with his pompous airs and his wealth, had no idea what Ava was capable of. He thought that by inviting her as a joke, He could put her in her place. He was wrong. She had never been a flashy person. Her attire was always simple, practical something that blended in with the background of the Blackwood mansion. But as she looked at the dress she had inherited from her mother, a dress that had been worn by her grandmother in the grandest ballrooms of the city, Ava felt a sense of connection to her ancestors. The dress was rich with history, and she would wear it with pride. It was a symbol of everything her family had once been and everything they could be again. With the dress in hand, Ava set out to prepare for the gala. But it wasn't just the dress she needed. She needed to gather evidence, something that would expose the Blackwoods for what they were. Her mind raced with ideas. She would have to be careful, sly, and patient. The stakes were high, and she could not afford to make a mistake. The day of the gala arrived, and Ava stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the gown her mother had worn years ago. The fabric shimmered under the soft light of her small apartment. She felt the weight of it, not just the physical weight of the dress, but the emotional weight of everything it represented. The injustice, the betrayal. Her family's legacy. Ava had always been invisible in the Blackwood mansion, just another face in the crowd, someone to clean the floors and scrub the toilets. But tonight, that would change. She was going to show Richard, Helena, and everyone at that gala that she was more than just a maid. She was a woman with a history, a woman with a right to be seen. As she arrived at the Blackwood mansion, the grand doors opened to reveal a sea of well-dressed guests, all dripping with wealth. The glint of diamonds, the rich fabrics of expensive suits and gowns, all of it felt like an assault on her senses. Ava stood for a moment, taking in the grandeur of the event. Her heart raced in her chest, but she held her head high. This was her moment. Richard's face lit up when he saw her. He didn't expect her to show up, let alone look like this. Well, if it isn't our dear cleaning lady, Richard sneered, raising his glass in a mock toast. The room erupted in laughter, but Ava didn't flinch. She stood tall, her eyes steady as she made her way toward the center of the room. The laughter faded, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. "This dress, Richard," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "It's not borrowed, it's not rented. It's part of my heritage, something your family tried to erase. But it's mine, and so is everything you took from us." Ava stood in the center of the grand ballroom, her presence cutting through the laughter and whispers like a blade. The moment Richard Blackwood had laid eyes on her, his expression twisted into a mocking smile. He had expected her to slink into the background, humiliated and out of place. Instead, she stood tall, the shimmering fabric of her mother's dress catching the light as she walked confidently toward him. Well, if it isn't our dear cleaning lady," Richard said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The guests around him chuckled, their eyes flicking between Ava and the elaborate champagne flutes they clutched in their hands. Ava didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Her heart beat steadily, her resolve unwavering. She locked eyes with Richard, her gaze piercing through his smug expression. She had been invisible for too long, and now it was time to make herself seen. "What's wrong, Richard?" Ava's voice was calm, but it echoed with authority. "You invited me here as a joke, but I'm not the one who should be laughing." Richard, his chest puffed out in arrogance, took a step closer. "Oh, I'm sure you're feeling a little out of place," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "I knew you wouldn't have the nerve to show up. You probably don't even know how to behave in a place like this." The guests around them snickered, but Ava stood her ground. She had endured worse in silence. But tonight, silence would no longer serve her. "You're right," Ava replied coolly, her voice sharp and deliberate. "I don't belong here in the way you think. But it's not because of who I am, it's because of who you are." The room grew still, the laughter fading into uncomfortable murmurs. Ava felt the weight of their gazes, but it only made her more determined. She knew what she was about to do would change everything. I know who you are, Richard. And I know who your father was, she said, each word carefully chosen to land with precision. Richard's confident smirk faltered for the briefest of moments, but he quickly regained his composure. What are you talking about? His voice was laced with mockery, but Ava could see the crack in his armor. Your father, Henry Blackwood, Ava began, her voice carrying across the room, didn't just steal from my family. He took everything from us. And he didn't just ruin our financial future. He took my grandfather's life. The gasps around the room were audible. People turned to each other in confusion, but Ava continued, her words now flowing with the weight of years of buried truth. You see, Richard, you don't know the full story. You don't know that your father's success wasn't built on hard work. It was built on lies, manipulation, and murder. My grandfather was once a man of wealth and honor. He was one of the few black businessmen who had the power to challenge your father's rise. But Henry Blackwood took him down, using his influence to ruin him. He poisoned him slowly, covered up his death, and erased his legacy. Richard's face twisted in disbelief, but Ava didn't stop. She had all the pieces. Now the photographs, the documents, and the recording that had been passed down through her family. She had proof. She held it in the palm of her hand, ready to expose him to the world. Ava reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, her fingers trembling only slightly as she unfolded the contents. A photograph of her grandfather's grave followed by a legal document that detailed the manipulated will Henry Blackwood had forged to cut her family out of any inheritance. Richard's face turned pale as he saw the evidence laid bare before him. You don't know the whole truth, Richard, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Your father's crimes didn't just destroy my family, they left us with nothing. And now, I'm here to take back what's rightfully mine. The room was silent, save for the hushed whispers that began to spread. The guests had been expecting some form of entertainment, perhaps a spectacle that would amuse them. But this was no spectacle. This was a reckoning. Richard took a step back, his expression now one of disbelief. You're lying, he stammered, his voice cracking under the pressure. You have no proof of any of this, but Ava didn't hesitate. She had prepared for this moment, for Richard's denial, for the lies he would try to spin. She pulled out her phone and connected it to the mansion's sound system. The speakers crackled to life, and a voice filled the room. The voice was unmistakable, Richard's father, Henry Blackwood, speaking to a man Ava had never met, but whose voice carried the same tone of power that Richard did. I've made sure everything is in place. You'll inherit the company, and no one will question it, Henry's voice said through the speakers, his words filled with cold authority. We'll remove the girl and her family from the equation. She won't be a problem for us anymore. The room froze. Every eye turned to Richard, but it was his face that betrayed him. His lips parted, his expression shifting from disbelief to something darker, something that Ava recognized all too well. He had been hiding the truth for years, hoping it would never come to light. But now his father's sins were being brought to the surface, and there was no escaping them. Ava's eyes locked onto Richard's. You can try to run from it all you want, but the truth has a way of catching up with people. Your father tried to erase my family. He didn't just kill my grandfather, he buried the truth. But I'm here to make sure that the truth is heard. Richard's face reddened with rage, his hands trembling as he clenched them into fists. You think you can just come in here and destroy everything I've built? He snarled. You're nothing but a liar. No one will believe you. But Ava was undeterred. The crowd, once so enamored with Richard's wealth and power, was now turning their attention to her. She had done what Richard had never expected. She had made them see her for who she was, not just a maid, but the rightful heir to a legacy they had tried to erase. The people who matter will believe me, Ava said, her voice cutting through the tension in the room. And now they'll Know what kind of man you really are." Richard's jaw clenched, his hands shaking with rage. But Ava didn't flinch. She stood tall, her heart swelling with a quiet victory. In that moment, as Richard's empire of lies began to crumble, Ava knew one thing for certain. She had taken back the power. And there was no going back. The room was still. The guests, once so enamored with Richard's wealth and power, now stood in stunned silence. Richard Blackwood, the man who had spent his life manipulating and controlling those around him, was now exposed for the fraud and murderer he was. His empire's pride, his legacy was crumbling before his eyes. The weight of the truth had struck him harder than he had ever anticipated. Ava stood in the center of the ballroom, her gaze unwavering as she watched Richard's face contort with rage and disbelief. The once confident man who had built his entire life on deceit now seemed small, cornered by the very truths he had spent years trying to bury. "Please, Ava," Richard's voice broke, desperation creeping into his tone. "You've made your point. Don't do this." Ava cut him off, her voice calm but firm. "No, Richard. You made the point a long time ago. You chose to destroy my family. You chose to bury the truth. I'm here to make sure that everyone knows exactly who you are." As she spoke, the door to the mansion opened, and a group of police officers stepped inside, their uniforms sharp and professional. The murmurs in the room grew louder as the realization set in. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was the beginning of Richard's downfall. He was going to face the consequences of his actions. Richard's face paled as the officers approached him. His hand trembled as he reached for his phone, no doubt trying to make a call to one of his many powerful connections. But it was too late. "Richard Blackwood," one of the officers said, his voice even but authoritative, "you are under arrest for the murder of Henry Blackwood, embezzlement, and a series of other criminal activities, including fraud and blackmail. You have the right to remain silent." Ava watched as Richard was handcuffed and led away. The guests in the room, those who had once clung to his every word, now turned their backs on him. The mansion, once filled with the echoes of his laughter and arrogance, was now filled with an uneasy silence. As the officers escorted Richard out, Ava took a deep breath. She hadn't come here to revel in his defeat. She had come for something far more important: justice. The ballroom began to empty, the guests reluctantly filtering out after the dramatic turn of events. Diane Morrison, the journalist who had helped her piece together the truth, approached her with a sympathetic smile. "Ava, that was incredible," she said, her voice low. "You've not only exposed Richard Blackwood's crimes, but you've reclaimed your family's legacy in front of the world." Ava nodded, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "It's not just about me. It's about everyone who's been overlooked, who's been silenced. Tonight was about showing people that the truth will always come to light, no matter how much power you have." Diane gave her a knowing look. "I think the world's about to see a lot more of you, Ava. This story is going to go far. People are going to hear about you, about your courage." Ava turned her gaze to the ballroom, the empty space now echoing with a sense of finality. Her journey had come full circle. She had walked into this house as an invisible servant, a woman whose name no one knew, whose existence no one acknowledged. But now she had reclaimed her place, not just in the mansion, but in the world. The next few days were a blur. Richard's arrest made headlines, and the media quickly picked up on the shocking story of his betrayal and murder of his father. The police investigation uncovered more of his financial crimes, including the embezzlement of millions from the Blackwood family's company. The public outrage was swift, and soon, Richard was facing not only legal charges but the complete collapse of his once untouchable reputation. But Ava's journey wasn't over. With the Blackwood empire now in disarray, the company was left in chaos, but Ava was ready. She wasn't interested in taking over the business for the sake of wealth or power. What she wanted was just real change, not just for herself, but for the people who had been exploited by Richard and his family for years. In the weeks that followed, Ava worked tirelessly to rebuild the company. She implemented policies that treated employees with respect, ensured fair wages, and opened up opportunities for those who had been marginalized by the Blackwoods' greed. She brought in new leadership, people who valued integrity over profit, and slowly, she began to transform the company into a beacon of opportunity for those who had been cast aside by the old regime. Helena Blackwood, Richard's estranged wife, reached out to Ava several times, each time offering an apology. The first time, Ava was cold, her heart still heavy with the weight of everything Helena had allowed to happen. But as time passed, Ava began to understand the complexity of Helena's situation. She had been complicit, yes, but she had also been a victim of Richard's manipulation. One afternoon, Helena visited Ava at the company's new headquarters. She stood in front of her, her eyes filled with remorse. "Ava, I know that no apology can ever make up for what my husband did to your family," she said, her voice trembling. "But I want you to know that I see you now. I see the woman you've become, and I'm sorry." Ava regarded her silently for a moment before speaking. "I don't need your apology, Helena. What I need is for you to help me make sure this never happens again. I don't want to destroy you. I want to build something better." Helena nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I will, I promise. I'll help however I can." Months passed, and Ava's work began to bear fruit. The company was flourishing, its profits rising as its new policies took root. The employees who had once been treated like disposable objects were now given a voice. Ava was no longer just a symbol of defiance. She was a leader, a woman who had fought for justice and won. One evening, as Ava sat in her office overlooking the city, she received a letter. It was from prison, written by Richard himself. He had been convicted and sentenced to 25 years without parole. The letter was short, filled with regret and guilt. But the final words stuck with Ava. "You've taught me the true meaning of justice. I didn't deserve your forgiveness, but you've shown me that it's never too late to change. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I've done." Ava didn't reply. She didn't need to. She had already forgiven herself. She had built something greater than revenge, a legacy that would last. As she looked out over the city, Ava knew she had finally reclaimed what was hers. Not just her family's legacy, but the opportunity to create something new, something based on fairness, dignity, and respect. For the first time in her life, Ava felt at peace.